Generally, when talking about building bigger arms, one of the first things that comes up in any conversation, and rightfully so, is the importance of the brachialis. Because of where this muscle is situated, the bigger this muscle is, the bigger your arms are going to be. It's underneath the bicep, so the bigger it is, it's going to push the bicep up more, and therefore when you measure your arms, they'll be bigger as a result of this muscle being bigger. So a lot of people, however, don't know how to train this muscle to maximize its development. So one of the things I'm going to talk about real quick, what you know about the brachialis, what you don't, why things are the way they are, so that you can practically apply it to maximize your return on investment of time and effort. So what do you know about the brachialis? You probably know it's one of 4 primary elbow flexors. Elbow flexion is its only job, and you can target this muscle more so when performing elbow flexion using an overhand or neutral grip. A lot of people will know that, but a lot of people don't know why that is. I'll explain that. What a lot of people don't know is that this muscle is most responsible for the first few degrees of elbow flexion, and the slower that you execute the movement when performing elbow flexion, the greater demand you're going to impose on the brachialis. Some people might know that, but most that do still don't know why that is, and I'm going to explain that in a second as well. So as it relates to the grip, because the brachialis is only responsible for elbow flexion, that's its only job, when you change your grip, you're not actually increasing the demand on the muscle directly. What's happening is you have to understand the effect of the biceps. They have multiple jobs: supination of the forearm, flexion of the elbow, flexion of the shoulder. So if we can limit their contribution, by default, brachialis has to do more work, and brachioradialis too, but we'll keep it to brachialis for now. So that's why the overhand or neutral grip increases the demand on that muscle. It doesn't do it directly, but rather limits the contribution from the bicep, and by default, something else has to pick up the slack. Now, is that going to change the way you do what you do, or the results you're going to get? Probably not, but it's always good to understand why things are the way they are, because it might influence how you do what you do down the road, depending on what you want to accomplish from your efforts. As it relates to being more responsible for the first few degrees of elbow flexion, you got to understand how muscles are designed. Muscles are designed in a way that their capacity to produce force is at its highest when it's at or near its mid-range. It's lowest when it's at its longest and shortest ranges. So if we look at the elbow in a fully extended position, the brachialis is closer to its mid-range here than the biceps are. Therefore, it's going to be able to produce more force to perform the first few degrees of elbow flexion. After a certain range, its capacity to produce force is going to be lower because it's in a more shortened position, but because of the way the body is designed, the biceps are now in a position where their capacity to produce force is higher because they're closer to their mid-range. So the body just transfers the stress to promote efficient and effective movement to limit fatigue because of the way the body is designed. That's one of the things I'm going to talk about now, because if you want to understand why the slower the speed, the greater demand, you got to understand how muscles are recruited and how the body is designed. Muscles are recruited as they're needed, from smallest to largest. Motor units from smallest to largest, weakest to strongest, based on their perceived demand. The body is designed in such a way to take the path of least resistance. So even if you try to limit the contribution of the biceps by going with an overhand or neutral grip, if you try to lift as fast as possible with as much force and velocity as possible, the biceps are still responsible for elbow flexion. So even though you've kind of limited one of the jobs that they can do, when you try to lift really, really fast, the brain is going to perceive that the demand is very high, and it's going to recruit the biceps to a greater degree. So when you understand all of this, it should influence the way you do what you do so that you can maximize your return on investment of time and effort depending on what you want to develop. If it's the brachialis, you want to mechanically limit the biceps by modifying your grip, modifying the speed that you use, and one of the things I didn't talk about was elbow position. So since the biceps are responsible for shoulder flexion, there's what's called active insufficiency. Any muscle that crosses more than one joint, when it is shortened at one joint, its capacity to produce force to move the other joint is going to be limited. It's going to be compromised. This is just how it's designed. So when the elbow is in front of the body, the biceps are shortened at the shoulder joint. Their capacity to produce force at the elbow joint is going to be limited. By default, brachialis, responsible for elbow flexion, it's going to have to do more work. So some of the better exercises to increase the demand on the brachialis: preacher curl, concentration curl, high cable curl, anything where the elbows are in front of the body, because what you're doing is you're shortening the biceps at the shoulder joint. By default, the brachialis has to do more work because you're limiting the amount of work that the biceps can do in that position. A lot of people think preacher curl, that's for the short head of the bicep, right? Well, this isn't to suggest that the short head of the bicep or the long head aren't working, but their capacity to produce force in these positions is limited. Concentration curl, a lot of people say, oh, it's for the long head of the bicep. Well, actually, once again, the biceps are shortened at the shoulder joint. Their capacity to produce force at the elbow joint is limited, and the same can be said for the high cable curl. So at the bottom here, I got a little strategy that takes all of this into consideration to increase the demand on the brachialis. Now, this isn't the best strategy ever, but it's a better one than probably what most people are doing. And as long as you understand the principles, you can kind of just make it your own. So I'll give you a little bit of a blueprint here. So strategy is very simple. We got 2 trisets here. First one, reverse preacher curl, isometric, 40 seconds. Remember, the slower the speed, you can't go slower than a complete dead stop. So that's going to increase the demand on the brachialis. The preacher position, elbows in front of the body, biceps are shortened at the shoulder joint. Their capacity to produce force at the elbow is going to be less. And the reverse grip, you're putting the biceps in a position of disadvantage. So all of that would suggest that the brachialis has to do the most amount of work when doing that type of exercise. You do 40-second isometric. When you can't do any more, drop the weight, perform 8 to 12 partials, only through the range in which the brachialis is most active in the first place, or most responsible for producing force to perform the direction of effort. And you do it slow, because that will limit the contribution from the biceps. You're just modifying the way you do what you do to increase the demand on one area at the expense of everything else. When you can't do any more, hold another 20-second iso. Slight bend in the elbow, hold it as long as you can. If you can't get to 20, that's okay. You do that 3 to 4 times, and that's the first part of a workout or a strategy designed to recruit and fatigue the brachialis. From there, the second sequence of movements is single arm, one arm at a time. So while one arm is working, the other arm is resting. We'll start with a concentration curl, bang off like 25 reps. Try to impose the demand by increasing the metabolic stress that the muscle is under. So go for like 25 reps. When the elbow's in front of the body, as it is with the concentration curl, biceps capacity to produce force is less. Brachialis has to do more work. When you can't do any more, get up and get into a stronger position. This is called a mechanical drop set, and just do a single arm hammer curl. With these, performing it slow to limit bicep contribution, performing only the range in which the brachialis is most responsible for, and then when you can't do any more, you hold an isometric with that same exercise for 30 seconds. Repeat for the other arm, do 3 to 4 times, and there you go. So that's a strategy that takes all those principles into consideration to increase the demand on the brachialis at the expense of everything else. A lot of people think that an overhand grip or a neutral grip is enough, but then they pick up weights that are too heavy. Their intention is to produce so much force that the brain perceives the demand to be very, very high, and it just overlooks the brachialis and just recruits the biceps anyways. So the whole reason why you use an overhand grip or a neutral grip in the first place is completely negated because of the way you're doing what you do. You need to understand why things are the way they are. And when you do, it should influence how you do what you do to get the result that you're trying to get in the fucking first place. You like the information, share it, click the fucking button at the bottom, subscribe to the channel. I'm going to keep bringing you the best information you're going to find.